It was hard times. Became homeless, was sleeping in the airport for about 2, almost 3 months, hiding from security guards, sleeping on a bench, going to school in the morning, playing music in blues bars in the night. It was exhausting, and I said, this is not the dream I had. It's harder. Is it worth it?
Welcome to the Lubo Smid podcast. I'm your host, Lubo, co-founder and CEO of STRV, here to talk to the industry leaders from the tech and startup space and ask them about their tips and tricks they use to operate at the top of the game. Today, I'm happy to welcome Timmy, Innovation Lead of Virtual Experience and XR at Innovation Arena of Volvo Cars and co-founder of The Point Labs. Timmy is a truly inspiring person when it comes to innovation. He has either created or contributed to many patents in VR and mixed reality space. On this podcast, he shares his story of building up his career that did not start that strong when he initially tried to be a musician and did not pan out, to later on the advising some of the biggest companies out there on their future strategy and innovation. So let's dive into the discussion. Welcome, Timmy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for hopping on the show. Before we dive in and we talk all about your role as the leader for innovation at Volvo, I wanted to go and talk a little bit about the inception, where the passion for cutting edge technology is coming from. How did it shape itself?
Yeah, so I started as a dreamer as a kid, right? So I was watching cartoons, I was reading books, and I was always fascinated by what technology can do. Like playing games. At that time, I was reading magazines about virtual reality, about robots. And then, I come from Romania, and, Romania was under communism before, and I'm exactly 1 year after communism fell down. So all the hopes was in my generation to save the nation. And I had an uncle that moved to US, and he was sending me postcards and the news. It's like, hey, I'm in US and there's now a Pentium 1. There is this appeared, and I went to Seattle and I met Bill Gates. He was making up stories, and that gave me
good stories.
Yeah, but that gave me a lot of drive, and it's like, wow, I want to be like Bill Gates. I want to do this and this and have impact, right? But then, as any other teenager, I got distracted, and then I wanted to be a rock star instead. So I got into music and guitars, and that was another trip on itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we can continue with that part of the story right away, because to me it feels like we have a lot in common in a way, and it seems like you had to go through some personal struggles to really establish yourself as a respected person within the tech space. And so how did it play out for you to be a musician?
It was hard. Every keynote or lecture or thing I present, my title is Snap Back to Reality, Here Comes Gravity. And that is a sum up of events and dreams and, visions. But when you put them to execution, or when gravity hits you, or, hey, there's no budget for this, or that's, when you realize, how hard things really are. And my dream was, to play music, to inspire people, to create. But in the same time, I was still trying to build games, building my own game engines, coding, learning that. But I felt that I didn't fit the system. And I often say that you need a box to think outside a box. So, for instance, education system in Romania for me was a pretty big box. Corporate was a big box that I had to learn what the box is to be able to think outside of it. So when I was finishing high school, I told my parents, hey, I'll leave Romania and I'll go to Copenhagen to study. They didn't believe me until the day I got accepted, but I told them that I'm studying engineering, but I went to study music. So I took my guitars and went to Copenhagen with a friend of mine, and it was harsh. It was hard times. Like, we were promised accommodation, but when we arrived there, it's like, hey guys, this is not available. So became homeless. Was sleeping in the airport for about almost 3 months. Was literally like Tom Hanks in the terminal, hiding from security guards, sleeping on a bench, going to school in the morning, playing music in blues bars in the night. And then it was exhausting. And I said, well, this is not the dream I had. It's harder. Is it worth it? But what that built for me was appetite for risk. Like throughout the stories, I think I've been homeless maybe 3-4 times, even after selling my company or things like that. But what I learned is to build resilience, like learning how to bounce back and grow. So I did listen then to my parents and, went to study engineering. They found out about the story 10 years later in a podcast.
So maybe they will find out even
more
stuff
today.
Yeah.
And I went to Aalborg University in Copenhagen. They opened a new campus. There was like ex-Nokia research center. When they closed down, a lot of ex-Nokia employees put their money together and formed some startups. Then the university came with, new mindset, like, hey, let's teach interaction design, innovation, service design, how do we build products? How do we build startups? So it was like a cross type of education, right? Like with multiple fields. And that really enabled me to access really amazing people. For instance, the Unity founders that, they started in Copenhagen. There are like 3 people, big dreamers. They wanted to democratize game engines to enable more creatives and developers to build, amazing experiences. And I grew up around them, like, right, I was poking them. It's like, hey, I want to learn. I want to do this and this and this. And they were sending me, it's like, hey, Timmy, build a demo for Lego. Go and do something so we can get them as a client, or work on the physics engine, or try this and this and this. So I was always the demo person. And that what developed was trying to see things in a different way and combine things that have never been combined before. Like, what if I use eye tracking or brainwaves to do a Jedi game, where in Star Wars Lego, you would control the game with your mind and eyes? And this was 2012, where eye tracking didn't really work out. And brainwaves, like if somebody had a phone in the building with Bluetooth on, those things didn't work out well. So that's how I started the appetite for technology and innovation, like combining things together. Like, yeah.
And you mentioned risk as an important part of your career. What is your safety net? What do you need to feel like you have some backup? Because you mentioned you ended up being homeless multiple times in your life, and I find this very inspiring. I'm surrounded by people and from whom, like, some of them, they take it relatively safe, right? They always keep a backup. But I also have other friends around me, and they go like above and beyond when it comes to taking on the risk, because it pushes them. And I think Richard Branson is a great example of someone like that, because he loves, or definitely, like, in the early days of his career, he would do crazy things to make it in the business, and he would put everything on the line. So what I wanted to ask you is there some element of your life where you like things to be in order? If anything, maybe it does not have to be the roof above your head, but something that you can always rely on, or you are pretty much ready to go all in?
I think over the time what I learned, and this I learned from my babushka grandma, she lives in north of Romania. Like, she grew up without electricity. She went through wars. She had 13 kids. And she's like a simple woman, right? And she speaks like a dialect that I don't master really well. But she told me like this really important lesson of building a good name values more than any riches in the world, which means that having trust as a currency, and for me, that's this ultimate safety net that I need to be in order, that I don't dilute trust. Like when I said that I'll do something, that I need to do something. And that in itself over time increased its value. And I see now after, and I'm so thankful and humbled by it, that after 10 years, people I work with in the past in a certain configuration, they're one phone call away. And even if they're billionaires now or something, it's like, hey, I actually need help. And, you need to go through that humble process of like, hey, I actually need help, Who do I know that can help with this, right? It's not only you trying to orchestrate everything. So for me, that's the most important thing. And another thing is to dream. Like my mission now, and I know it sounds cheesy, but like what I do on the side through my lectures and so on, it's like still help people to dream, because during COVID, a lot of them realize that they don't dream anymore or have broken dreams. So I do think dreams require a lot of discipline, and where there is no vision, you can, drift really hard in life, right? And you find yourself 10 years later, it's like, what did I do? Why am I still here? Purpose gives you direction, and direction is fueled by passion. Passion is endurance. Like, how much are you willing to go through it with that dream till you say, yeah, maybe I should do something else, or it's not worth it. And that for me, like over my journey, I struggled to understand if I'm a creative or a nerd. Am I a rock star or a engineer? Am I good at art or design or good at coding? And I realized and found, with the new tools and technology, that I can do both. I can do creative thinking and critical thinking, and that intersection is where magic happens. That's where innovation happens, right?
Like, to me, it feels like getting to innovation, right? There is so many angles how you can get to it that like the opportunities are pretty much endless. But how do you make this a process? You are an innovation leader at Volvo, right? And it's a massive organization, right? So it's something different than when you are an individual that wants to dream about what is possible and what not, because I assume you have to put things in practice and you have to prove that the value is there, right? And you work on something for a long time, and then finally when it is getting launched, it's a big celebration, but the process behind it is extremely rigorous. So how do you apply this creative process into practice within a larger organization?
Yeah, it's been a journey there as well, right? It's been 10 years since I started at Volvo. I was anti-corporations, anti-automotive, or not necessarily anti, not interested, right? I worked with startups before and like creative industries. And as I said in the beginning, you need a box to think outside a box. And Volvo in itself was a pretty big box. They had their core values in safety, right? And then past maybe 8 years, they started, to change their identity, their design, but still with the core values, freedom to move in a safe, sustainable, and personal way. And I took that as a mission, and I said, how do I deconstruct that vision and take certain elements and combine them with other areas to help Volvo secure its future in 20, 30, 40 years? And the way I started when I joined, my boss found me, and he protected me and gave me a janitor room where I started a VR lab that now, there are 50 people using VR, and, it started with the janitor room with the paper saying out of order, and then we were experimenting with the latest things there and building simulators and so on. And since then, I actually learned I never wanted to play politics, the corporate politics, going on the ladder. I was like young and I had different ambitions, and I was inspired by what Unity did, and I said, like, I want to democratize these tools across the company, because I found out how inefficient it was. Like, there were 3 or 4 departments doing the same stuff. They didn't talk to each other. Even I was like, hey, but you use the same tools, and you have 3 different deals with the same supplier for licenses. It's like, what the hell? It's like, why not building a community so we share and build this competence further? Why not, okay, I have a 3D model of a car and you have the moose for the simulator. Give me the moose, I give you the car, right? Like, starting to trade things. And then I learned that I need to do strategy and tactics in the same time. Play the long-term game, but understand what's in my hand now and what I need to do. And during this period, probably I saw 3 or 4 innovation reorgs in the company, right? Like, we tried every type of, satellite offices, like, the Google moonshot model, Space 10 model, a Silicon Valley office, an office inside where we were running services for the company and different departments, an investment fund, work with startups.
What in your eyes worked the best?
I think the last configuration, where I think past 3-4 years, we were asked by the executive team to form an arena. So I do believe in emergence. So what we did, we said that the prerequisite for emergence is diversity. So we hired and we collected all the misfits from the company and set the right tools and temperature for them to innovate. And insane ideas started, like battery management and innovation combined with XR simulation, or graph technology combined with parking and charging strategy, or so it was like a lot of areas intersecting, and in those we started to create these clusters of ideas. And those we were spinning off across the company, or as a startup, or as a competence that we started to build. But a lot of it had to do outside the comfort zone, understanding that if we take 4 quadrants of innovation, that we had to step out of the current business, current trajectory. With innovation in corporation, it's important to learn how to pay respect. It took me a while. Like, I was disrespecting the product. It's like, I don't want to sell SUVs, in 10 years from now, it's bad for the planet, and we want to be sustainable. But in the same time, it's the thing that puts money on the table, pays for your bread. So you need to be, respectful. Is like, yeah, it's because of that we afford to take these risks outside. And the way we build a curriculum there, and that I got inspired also to the studio I started on the side. I've been inspired by Bauhaus movement a lot in the 1920s. And that's how we set up the innovation office. Or Neri Oxman's group at the MIT Media Lab, where she combines biologists with computer scientists with data scientists, and they create, novel things. And novelty is in those new ways of intersection. So more than thinking like an expert or a generalist, you think like a producer. And that's why you need to think like a producer and a curator. Decide what not to do. Because, we were talking on the way here that sometimes if you put too many things on the plate, you either think that if you don't continue pushing it so hard, you will lose interest or passion or that spark. Or if you just curate and focus only on one thing, but you don't combine it with other, right? Like, it's pretty hard to find novel ways to build things. So with Bauhaus movement, like, I don't know, like, you look at the iPhone, the Dove soap bar, Arne Jacobsen chair, they all come from the same school of thought in the 20s. Like, they studied how light reflection breaks on a plastic that or metal, and that you see on the corners of an iPhone. If you look at it, how the light curves around the shape. The Dove soap bar, the shape of it, it's so ergonomic to hold in your hand. And those principles of aesthetics, functions, dynamics, it's like people would recognize it. Yeah, it comes from those principles. So I was thinking, how do you make things recognizable? That even if you work for a variety of clients or projects or things, you can trace them back to the same core values, like the same set of tools. Like, oh, of course it's this department because they always talk about non-car, or like they talk about safety, but from a healthcare perspective or a society perspective, not about the SUV perspective, right? So that was a bit some of the ideas that started to grind during the time.
What has been one of the projects that you worked on within Volvo that you are the most proud of right now, if there is one to mention?
Yeah, there are quite a few. So it's like one is like the whole simulation pipeline where we are able to test a lot of safety features that are either too dangerous or too rare to test in real life. So we use synthetic data and engines like Unity where we can replicate specific scenarios. But the most proud of, and I think that had most impact on my career, that's why I started to be recognized as a thought leader, was the project with VR and mixed reality. So about 6 years ago, together with Vario, this startup. I think that project had all the elements of do the right things right. Not only doing the right things or doing things right, but doing the right things right. Meaning that we found a startup in Finland. They were building this most insane headset in the world. We built IP together. We asked the investment fund from Volvo to invest in them in Series A and C and D, like really show support. And it's so hard to go to the board to convince, hey, there's a VR company we want to invest in. It's like, why VR? We are Volvo, we're building cars, right? And then finding the right use cases and building a community around the tool, like design, manufacturing. Like I really wanted to build this pipeline across the whole chain. So from early concept to UX research, to R&D, to ergonomics, to marketing, to manufacturing, right? And it was interesting that we work with the startup as if it was our team. Like we work together on the product. We build a product together. So the Vario XR1, which was the most advanced mixed reality headset. I mean, you see Vision Pro has heavy influences from Vario. I asked them once, this is really cool, but can I drive with it? And I was like, you're crazy. What do you mean? It's like latency is like 40, 50 milliseconds. And then 2 weeks later, they came like, hey, test it now. And imagine that we had like this EX90 full of computers in the back, duct tape. I put the headset on and I was driving around 140 per hour with the headset on. And I built this thing that I called Tinder for designers, meaning that you drive and you can swipe between dashboards and car models as you drive. And then you can take navigation from the central stack and put it as a head-up display. And then in Figma from the backseat, can ask the designer, hey, move the blinker icons 5 pixels to the left. And then imagine this now after a few years with large language models and voice assistants, where you reduce the feedback loop. You save money of, the iterations. You have more quality. And I always believe that by using the same tools, you speak the same language. So kind of for the first time, designers and engineers worked together because we knew what we were talking about. It's like, send me this in this format, and then you open that scene and you build it like this, and I'll code this, right? So we started to collaborate better because we used the same tools between design and R&D. We filed a few patents on it, right? Like driving with the headset. We were able to test like a moose crossing the road in front of you and your brain gets tricked. You think that it's a real moose and the car thinks it's a real moose, so the car will brake, right? So we can test those scenarios as well. And with that, I think it exploded all over. We were even at Adam Savage on Tested. We went all over the news. We were touring. I mean, even now, after 4 years, I'm still touring around the world to talk about that project because it's been great.
No, it sounds super exciting. And like, what was your scare level when you were driving the car? You mentioned 140 kilometers per hour.
Yeah, Volvo is mad if I say this, but yeah, it wasn't a test track. Of course.
Let's say it was a fast speed.
Yeah. No, I mean, the reason why I was...
How did you feel?
First, I thought it would be worse, but it's so crazy how fast your brain adapts. And I was reading this book from Don Norman of Thinking with Complexity and the Design of Everyday Things. It's like how some of the tasks and our cognition gets fooled, through iterations. And I think after 2 minutes, I forgot that I was in VR because my brain compensated for the imperfections or for limited field of view or something. But of course, we had safety measures. We had also a driver in the back that could take the wheel. And, so we did it in a test environment. But for me, that moment was crucial. It was like, and just being able to be in this car and the car that you worked for the 4 years ago on a whiteboard, you're able to drive it like from the whiteboard on the road, instead of waiting 7 years, because these are the life cycles, right? When you design a car till it's produced.
Takes quite some time.
Yeah, and imagine like just working on something, you're just being able to drive it as it would be in the future. And now actually the car's been launched a few months ago, the EX90, and seeing that that's the car that we worked on it for so long and doing all these adjustments and
to make it really perfect.
Yeah. And then another thing is like the way we were doing with the innovation department, and that's also a great example why I said that this project should be a template on how things should be done, is that we also work with Unity and NVIDIA as partners. And also I learned in a group, like how do we activate the collective intelligence of the whole group and department to bring new ideas, and doing it in an ambidextrous way. With left hand, okay, we build these tools to help the company build better cars or faster or more efficient. And in the same time, with the right hand is like, okay, now that you trust us, leave us alone for 6 months and we'll explore how we can use this in entertainment. What if we work with Universal and Disney and, you can drive through the Jurassic Park's theme park or something, right? So it's like we were able to play a bit outside of the box because
of that trust.
Yes.
This is a great example, and like I definitely see the big impact in the manufacturing. But what are some of the other pieces where you think virtual and augmented and mixed reality can play a big game in the future? What are you excited the most about?
I mean, not only the design and production part, as you say, but consumer thing. Like, for instance, we stayed a bit away from the metaverse thing, but in the same time, the way we were thinking about it, well, it's a really fertile soil for storytelling, meaning that you can find new ways for the community to interact with your brand and values without interacting with the product necessarily, right? And you have great examples from Nike and DressX and others that managed to activate that in a nice way. And I think bringing value, like really personal stories or experiences to the consumers, right? Like being able to use perspective. One thing about VR, why I got in love with it, I mean, first time was when I was part of the eye tracking company that we sold to Meta. I met Paul Mulaki that gave me a Quest kit. This was like long ago, like 2011, maybe before. And it was duct tapey, didn't really work all the time. But what I realized, the power of that technology is that I'm an introvert, but also storyteller. So to captivate you or a person, is that I take the CEO of Volvo and I put the headset on his head. He becomes a toddler. Toddlers first time look at their hands. People in VR, the first time they try to see if they see their hands. Then I have to teach them how to walk. It's like, hey, teleport or walk here, but don't trip on the cables. Don't touch that, move in a safe way. And they become to control the experience and the narrative. So then, of course, they'll see a car, they'll evaluate it. Oh, this is a great job. When they take the headset off, we connect on equal terms. It's like, dude, don't forget, I saved you from tripping 2 minutes ago. Or like, so you're able to change perspective. So then I kind of moved a bit above or away from only doing the tools for the sake of efficiency or, just technology or because it's complex or challenging, but also for storytelling. Like if we work with strategies and, I told you that we work with Alex McDowell, who made Minority Report and Fight Club, and he's a futurist and world builder. And, he's the OG person in that space. And what I learned from, working with him is like the way you can change perspective and lenses. So a CEO to think like an engineer or like a CEO to think like a consumer in Jakarta in 2050, and you put them in that scenario. So it's like, I don't think EX90 electric Volvo could be on a street in Jakarta in 2050. So what else can Volvo do? Can we get into healthcare? Can we do this and that, right? So painting them a black mirror, but also a white mirror episode. So it's like, which one are we choosing? Here's the data. Here are the prediction. Here are the trends. Right, but also here's the emotional experience that moves and makes you make a decision. And I think that's super powerful, like engaging with those type of narratives and stories.
So when we ask the question what the future holds for us, and similar, I think that you might be one of the better positioned people to answer how you see it with your own eyes. How do you expect the world in terms of technology to change over the next several decades? What are some of the things that you feel are going to happen?
I think there'll be even a bigger shift of like cross domains, or that it's not like I think we should move away from only technology or like efficiency in building infrastructure as we did since industrial era, to be able to change or nudge behavior for the big goals that we have, right? I think we need better stories. We need collective imaginated futures. We need to build the same vocabulary to describe the future we want. I'm both excited and scared about the future, right? Because I saw, I've been there, right? Like with the time machine, no. But it's
the Black Mirror episodes, right?
Yeah, those ones, right? And when you realize that it's not so far-fetched and it's so fragile, like the future is so fragile because some of the things are as a small policy or decision that can, restrict certain freedoms, or certain freedoms can actually be painful for us on the long run, right? And we see that a lot in society. And I always the reason why I always like to be in the future and try to push the boundaries of technology is like I do it till a point I'm getting scared of it, and then I take a few steps back and say, well, this might go really wrong. So what do we do? How do we build strategies that protects us from getting there, right? And then going, for instance, to EU or public institutes or so on and propose, hey, you need to prepare and build not necessarily policies or investment strategies around this, but like we need to enable human to aspire for better things than, getting stuck in that loop. And some of these cartoons and movies, like one of the scariest things is like, Adventure Time, like the cartoons, there is like a dystopic scene there where everyone was in a capsule with the headsets, and they're like working in real life to work in the virtual one, and they're like so stuck in that things, like almost like machines, right? And that's when we become machines, because we're so embedded with technology and there's no emotion. I think that's super dangerous.
And you mentioned that you go to a point where you pretty much get scared and then you take a couple of steps back. But what are some of the areas where you actually are on the opposite side? What are some of the areas where you get really, really excited?
Art and design. I think that's also kind of the things that we started on the side with the studio, that we try to work also with fields like architecture, fashion, and so on. And there are the fields where I always felt the misfit, right, or not welcome to the table of architects or designers, because I'm not a designer by training, but I do love design, right? And then those areas excite me a lot, because I do think that those areas, together with technology, can, being able to design better experiences and interactions and human-centric design while having planetary, so how do you find that balance, right? And art in the sense of narratives and stories, like to help us aspire for those values or systems or scenarios. So for me, that gives me a lot of excitement. And when I can intersect them in one point, that is for me like the most valuable thing when I see science, engineering, design, art, like just in that focal point, how they converge. That's my favorite part.
How do you manage being in charge of innovation at Volvo and at the same time having your own studio to go outside of automotive and look at all of the other things where you could deploy your creativity and experience with the point labs?
Yeah, the thing at Volvo, it's not, we don't have like a charge. We made it as non-hierarchical as possible. Like we lead by example, so we are several leaders that take, that vision and push through it, and then
we definitely push
the
through the example, right?
Yeah, and with that is kind of more of nurturer or caretaker, right? Like you set the right conditions for innovation to happen, and practice what we preach, right? You need to go there and code as well for others to, believe in it. Then I think the stuff on this, like the studio, the point labs, and it comes from that point, started with Denisa, my partner. Like she's an architect, and then we were discussing about like this dream incubator. Like imagine this place, like the new immersive Bauhaus, where we can work with these technologies, but challenge, the most conservative things, because automotive, it's a conservative industry, but it's not the most conservative. I think architecture, real estate, fashion, they're even more conservative than automotive.
Do you think fashion is more conservative than automotive?
Yeah, you perceive it as creative and open and free, but like in tooling, for a designer to move from a sketch to an iPad, and now from iPad to whatever, Clo or Marvelous or these tools, and to do things in VR and virtual fashion, it's like insane big steps, right? I mean, the activations that are happening, it's mostly brand activations, that it's like on the commercial side. But if you speak with designers, and I think that's the point where I actually stop being obsessed with the tools or building tools for the sake of it. When at Volvo, there's this clay modeler, And, I was coming with the narrative, oh, VR can replace clay models and we can save costs and so on. And there's like this old little guy with the carving knife and almost crying and looking at me. It's like, hey, please don't take this from me, because this is the only thing that makes me feel like an artist or like a designer, that contact of taking and carving through the clay model and so on, right? So it's not always about the efficiency.
And it's not for everyone, right? To be relying on the technology. Sometimes people just want to do things with hands. They want to feel it. And so where do you think the ideal balance is between like leveraging the technology for our benefit, but also not being too much caught up with things so we lose the sense of the real world?
Yeah, that I think it's a really good point. And like in the sense of, in all this pursuit of efficiency, now losing empathy for the human. Like when I do my lectures, I ask the students, what's your dream? What do you want to do, right? It's like, oh, I want to build schools. I want to take VR in South Africa and here and there. And I asked them, when did you hug your mom the last time? I was like, oh, me and my mom, we don't really talk to each other. We're like, and I was like, well, if you can't go over, and I understand, like there are those scenarios where it's like abuse or something, like we don't go there. I understand, right? But if you can go over the most basic things and closest to you, right? How do you think you'll have the guts and resilience to go through all those hardships, to go in those hard environments and try to save the world if you can save the world around you to, your world model in that sense? So I challenge them a bit like that. What's in your hand now that you can do now with the tools that are there to make a dent or a change? And then progressively, build that. So recognize your season, recognize who you are in this moment and who you can be. Because I was Neri OXMAN in the podcast with Lex Friedman a few weeks ago, and she was saying about this faith is the intersection of who you are and who you want to be. And that's also the same with the tools that you have in your hand and what you can do today. And for me, that was a hard lesson because I was so lost in the future always. And I had this hard discussion with my co-founder this week where we had to be in a vulnerable point and just point out some things and say, wow, sometimes I'm so lost in the super long-term game and strategy because I calculate the risk, but I don't realize how it affects the ones around me, that sometimes get lost in my blurry visions. And they're like, hey, but what are we doing now? Tomorrow? Well, how do we put it in practice? And it's such a hard balance to do, right? Like, okay, this is the tools that we have, so let's see what we can build now. Yeah.
Is that related to what you said initially about the song and basically, being realistic with things that are happening, just to bring you down to earth a little bit more?
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
What are some of the projects outside of automotive that you focus on with the Point Labs? Where what is the span of? I assume it's pretty wide, but what is the span of what you are trying to tackle?
So we set up as a venture studio. So we do experiment a lot. We took a lot of inspiration for Space 10, MIT Media Lab, OXMAN, Norscan, like a lot of innovation design offices, and we try to understand, hey, what's our specific flavor, right? Because we do work with cognitive science and interaction design, but we also do virtual spaces and narratives. We build stories, right? So these are the tools that help us build those stories for specific institutions or brands. But those stories are to inform strategy. So we go, for instance, to EU or a museum or public institute and say, hey, this this is how the future looks like, and we do some diegetic prototypes from the future, and can this inform your innovation strategy on this? These are the trends, this is the data, this is the futures. So those are some of the projects more on the high level strategic, but hands-on, we build virtual experiences. We're building like a perfume company now. We're also doing an art piece together with the studio from Istanbul called Ouch. They're doing like AI sculptures based on super complex data, for instance, from NASA, from CERN. We're actually working on a project that I can't mention now. It's still under NDA, but will be something super big coming in a few months. And it is...
Well, stay tuned.
Yes, it is exactly that art, science, engineering, design. We take complex data from CERN about the observable universe and about the human genome, and then they're represented by AI sculptures, like generative AI, in a simple form as a cube. So all this complex data that we as humanity know about ourselves and the universe in a simple object as a cube. And in mixed reality with the latest Vario, you're able to interact with it, and based on your emotions, it kind of reflects a bit of some parameters there that kind of nudges your specific behavior. And it's an art manifest. We premiered the teaser at Cannes for Thierry Breton, like the commissioner for media and technology on EU. And we showed this is an example of how we as startups, companies, studios work together already. So if you want to help to fertilize the soil for us to continue working and bring leadership in Europe in terms of technology, in terms of art, in terms of culture, this is an example. It's an artifact, right? So it's a discussion opener. Yeah. So those are some of the projects I can talk about. Other than that, there are some interesting upcoming projects also with virtual architecture and fashion, but a lot on the story, like, again, 2050, 2070 scenarios, and
Wow.
that's our spot.
Well, I would love to ask you about some of the recent trends in the tech space. Of course, Vision Pro is to be launched early next year. At least it seems like. You are very close to the world of mixed reality, spatial computing, and all of that. You've been in that space for quite a while. What do you think is going to happen, and what do you think of the quality of the device itself?
I think it will start a new season or batch of designers that will again combine fields, going probably a bit better to the core, like human cognition, like affordances, and how you interact. So basics of interaction design and building on it again for a new device and new paradigm, like tangible computing, contextual UX. And this now with AI, where you can personalize the content to be there at a certain time in a specific way to enable you to a lot of things. New forms of entertainment, right? Like having virtual influencers or musicians playing in your living room. And I think that's super interesting, like the whole transmedia space, right? Where you have characters that are on Netflix, but they're part of a game as well, and you can interact with them.
Do you think they would also possibly influence your comeback as a musician?
I was thinking, because during COVID, I was thinking, like, how can I play music, right, with my friends, but in a different way, right?
You still do that for fun?
Not as much as I want, no, but I want to go back to it in a way of now, for instance, putting up a concept together, so more conceptual and experimental, where we can do also visualization and projections with music. And
there's one more trend that I wanted to cover. We talked a lot about virtual reality and mixed reality, but especially this year seems like it's the year of artificial intelligence. A lot of things are happening at an extremely rapid pace. It's happening at a pace that me personally, I don't even want to be predicting what's going to be happening a couple of years from now, because I don't know what's happening tomorrow.
Yeah.
And technology is becoming so helpful and is making so many things so much easier.
Yeah.
That I find it extremely powerful. And how does that all play into the mix for you with what's happening in AI?
I think it is exciting, but also a lot of noise. There's a friend of mine, Robert Scoble. He used to be like a tech journalist, and he posted once on Twitter that AI plus human beats AI. AI plus AI beats human. Human plus human is now beating AI, right? So it's like this equation. So learning how to work with it, not against it, or and what I see is that even though it lowers the threshold in many points, I do think we still need curatorship, because we as humans, we can deal with freedom. Like if you have all the tools in the world, like if you ask Bjarke Ingels, the architect, what do you build in the desert with no constraints, they would know what to tell you. If you put a blank paper in front of an artist, they won't start sketching right away. It's, you get creative blank. And I could see the differences between, for instance, my co-founder Denisa, where she's architect by training, and the way she uses Midjourney for concepting, or the way I'm using Midjourney, where I'm like, okay, Pope in a red Ferrari. I was like, oh wow, it's cool. Make it style of Studio Ghibli, but it's not. It's mediocre, right? It becomes like, and you could see what designers can do if they can articulate the process and know how and where to use it in the process. I think it brings a lot of value. But otherwise, it can, if you don't have the foundations, it kind of unlocks a lot of mediocrity. So I tell my students, they're like, hey, can we use Chat GPT or this and this in the course or assignment? It's like, well, of course you can. I mean, I generated some of your slides that I'm teaching you with, but you can pretend that you're part of the class, and I pretend that I give you an assignment. You pretend that you do it. I pretend that I read it. You pretend that you're graduating, and I pretend that I'm hiring you down the line. So do you want to use ChatGPT completely, or you want to build the foundations? And then, of course, use it for efficiency, for stupid things that take a lot of time, right? But not for the main creative act, because we do have finite attention. And if you send me an image, hey, Timmy, look, what I did is like this cool song with AI, or I did this rendering. What do you think? And I'll be, oh, cool. And then I'll try to make my own, but I'm not consuming yours as I would do with something that it's more human in the loop or more emotion into it, right? Because I don't see as much value. So like on this podcast, Not Investment Advice with Jack Butcher, they were talking about, the Drake song, right? I'll listen to it once because I'm curious what AI can do, but it's not a banger. I won't listen to it nonstop as I listen to Sultans of Swing or something, right? Like, it's not the same, not necessarily quality, but connection. I do feel disconnected from all this.
You feel like you need to feel the perceived effort that was put into it?
I think it's about curatorship, right? Because deciding what not to do and what to do, and it's programmed and really polished content, right? Like there was this article, is it art if it's put in a museum? Or what does it make it art, right? And I wrote once this article on LinkedIn that went viral, like, dear design students, you're not artists. And that exploded a lot, right? It's like, art is about the artist and design is about the user. Like, how they are impacting. One is bringing solutions, one is asking better questions. And for me, how, like the depth of, the AI generated things, they all start to look the same for me, right? My whole Twitter feed is just art that looks the same. And that's a bit the danger, because it misses emotion, it misses affection, it misses memory, or things that you connect to a specific thing for a specific reason, right?
So, would you agree with the statement that when something is generated by AI, there is a higher likelihood that it will miss soul?
I think that's too much of a level of subjectivity in that to say, because maybe one of those images connects with you on a deeper level for different reasons, right? Like based on your core memories, or a specific color palette that reminds you of, a movie that you saw as a kid or something. So there are actually a few AI artists that I like a lot, right? Because they give me a specific vibe. But if the vibe is the same all over and it's kind of mediocre, then it misses the soul for me. Yeah.
And as we speak about AI, what are some of your go-to tips how to leverage it? Or, for example, for what do you use Chat GPT on your daily basis, if anything?
I used it quite a lot before, but I stopped using it because I realized it becomes dumber and dumber the more I use it. And then I kind of force myself in the process to abide by its frame, right? So then, for instance, if you work in Miro or Figma, you work in a certain way. If you take a pencil and a paper, you work differently, right? So then you constrain a bit yourself. You need to phrase things in a way and prompt it to get to expect something, but then dilutes a bit of the creative and design process in that sense. But I think what is really good at is mixing concepts that we don't see obvious. So for instance, one thing I do is like, okay, combine the Amazon Horizon Innovation, the Cone of Possibilities framework with this McKinsey framework and with Alex McDowell world building and futuring. Bring me this. And then it comes up with really interesting things that I don't see as obvious, right? And it forces me to think out, or, yeah. And I think for that is super valuable. But other than that, like there was once, for instance, with a partner of mine, we were building stories for a dev team, but we also ended up working on those stories, right? And if you build the acceptance criteria and the user story with Chat GPT, and then you use Chat GPT to answer them, it's like, dude, we work for AI. This is so bad, right? It's like, yeah.
If nothing else, what would be 2 to 3 things that you would like people tuning in to this podcast to take away from it?
I think going back to some of the core dreams, like I think if we lose the sense of why we do things, no matter how noble it is, it will destroy us. Like I think we need to get hold of our personal why, and then the collective, right? Like how do we work in a collective or community? Second one is using the same tools, build a certain vocabulary that enables us to collaborate in a better way. And the third one, I think a bit of the long game as well. Like what I do feel the past few years, and also with AI and automation and efficiency, we are losing a bit of the human soul, as you mentioned before. And for me, that's imperfections. Like I learned over the years to manage imperfections. For me, it's like I can pick up a detuned guitar and I can still play it because I adapt. And for me, that's human. Like for me, that's emotional. That creates some connection. And I think, for instance, with all this Web3 and NFTs and cryptos, this is disincentivized long-term thinking. Everyone understood that, I can do short wins here and there, right? But then you're not doing anything long-term. Like also in design, how do you make something that lasts? How do you make, something that over generations people will talk about? That's why, for instance, I got back to the roots. I went to Bauhaus and learned how did they build that school? Like, how do we build a studio around that elements or an innovation group? Or yeah.
Beautifully put. Timmy, thank you so much for taking the trip and visiting me in Prague and joining the podcast. I had a blast. And yeah, thanks again for a wonderful discussion.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening or watching to the very end. I hope it can only mean one thing, that you liked it. And if you did, please go ahead and follow, subscribe, or write a review. And it will be tremendously appreciated by our side. In the meantime, there are a bunch of other episodes that you can check out. And I'll be looking forward to catching you next time.